Okay, thank you. So this panel is about language and identity. I'm Paul Hansbury. I'm from the University of Warwick. And we will have 3 speakers on this panel. The first speaker will be Maria Katarzyna Prenner on my right. We will then hear from Ioana Zamfir and Dr. Sviatlana Liasovich, who is joining us online. So we'll get straight over to Dr. Prenner. Dr. Maria Katarzyna Prenner studies Slavic philology at the University of Cologne in Germany and at the University of Vienna in Austria. She currently works as a professor assistant at the University of Graz in Austria and is associated with a project at the Justus Liebig University in Gießen, Germany. I apologize for my pronunciation of German place names, where she worked until October 2023. Her research interests include formal linguistics and contact and conflict linguistics, with a focus on the languages Ukrainian, Belarusian, Russian, Polish, and Czech. Dr. Prenner and I first met about a decade ago in Minsk. Nini, you have the floor.
If you could just help me with opening the presentation.
I think I just.
Okay, but I have to share it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's do it here. Great. So thank you very much for the invitation here. I'm Austrian, but also I'm half Polish. So, and you can hear it from my accent that my native language is German. And I will take you, I will take you a bit into the world of linguistics. Yeah, so I guess I'm the only linguist here, but I will try to give you a short overview of what I am doing. So I'm interested in alphabets and cultural conflicts in the elite press debates in 19th and 20th century in Belarus. And this is my plan for my today's presentation. Well, in the beginning, I will give you a linguistic and script historic key data overview. And then I will go to my next point, which is why it is a conflict, what we see displayed in all the examples I will provide you with. So, and the next question is, what is a conflict community? Because I analyze all of my examples here via the prism of a conflict community. And conflict is always negatively connotated, but I don't see conflict as only negatively connotated. So the third point in my presentation is that conflicts can also be a catalyst for progression. And you see, I don't have a clear conclusion in my presentation, because point 4 is kind of a conclusion, and it's not only a conclusion, but it's also work in progress. So if you have questions after my presentation, I'm very happy to answer them. So these are the linguistic key data in for my presentation. Well, we have heard today already about the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and its important role. And we all know that Belarusian is an East Slavic language, and Ruthenian is the common predecessor of modern Ukrainian and Belarusian languages. And Ruthenian was used between the 14th and the 18th centuries. And at this time, Muscovy already had a distinct language. And Ruthenian was the official language of communication in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. And it was written naturally in Cyrillic script. And close political relations during the time of Polish-Lithuanian period led to a gradual introduction of the Latin script for writing Ruthenian, and this is the crucial point. And in the 19th and early 20th centuries, Belarusian dialects developed into a new Belarusian standard language, and this language was written in both Latin and Cyrillic scripts. And on the following slides, I will give you some examples. And in the 19th century, it was, which was very difficult for the Belarusians, a voluntary decision to adopt the Latin script, the Latinica, as a way to distinguish themselves from the Russian Empire was made, while simultaneously expressing solidarity with the Polish independence movement. You know that Poland didn't exist in this period. No. Moving. Strange. Yeah, the next one.
If you just press the button at the top.
Wait. Okay, so these are two examples of how deeply incorporated the Latin script is into Belarusian identity. On the left hand side, you see the church bell of Moldova from 1583, which says Marcin Hoffman mnie slival roku and 1583. And the other example is the Bychowiec Chronicle, which stems from the 16th century. And you see also here, it is written in Latin script. No, it's again. Okay, so, and in the 19th century, the first Belarusian newspaper, Muzhitskaya Pravda, which was exclusively printed in Latin script, appeared, and there were only 7 issues in total, and they were printed in Hrodna and in Białystok. And Kalinowski was the main author of this newspaper and was sentenced to death due to his anti-Tsarist stance. And during his imprisonment, he wrote the famous letters from beneath the gallows, and also in Latin script, because he thought it was the only script one could use. So, and now we are switching to the early 20th century, and you have here a lot of newspapers displayed in different scripts. And this is the time period I'm particularly interested in. We have various newspapers that are printed exclusively in Latin script, and they are mostly directed to a Catholic auditory, whereas on the other side we have biscriptal newspapers, and this means that the addressees are both Catholics and Orthodox Christians. And this time period for me as a linguist is in particularly very interesting, because it is a pre-orthographic phase of the Belarusian language, and we can see a lot of different influences, various influences from model languages such as Polish and also Russian, to a lesser extent Lithuanian, when you just want to have a look on the grapheme inventory of the Latin alphabet, for example, and also from for a lesser extent from Ukrainian. So why it is a conflict, and what is a conflict community? I will briefly rush through the bullet points here. So the term conflict community goes back to Yang Shen, and the conflict community is defined by the actual or apparent paradox of a community formation through a conflict, and the conflict opponents who do not necessarily want to see themselves as a community, but they exhibit central discursive and praxeological commonalities. And the field of the tension between the intertwining of an own and foreign interpretations of events and actions develops into a component of identity and self-understanding. And actors involved in the conflict are given the opportunity to utilize this conflict for their own purposes, and thereby perpetuating it. And if you're interested in it, I'm also focusing on the 21st century. So how the conflict is perpetuating into the 21st century. Yeah. So what are the characteristics of the Belarusian conflict? So one of them is that they are negatively intertwined in system integrative. The second one is that they These characteristics are structure and canon forming. This means that we have stylization of the other in literature and fiction, as well as the application of two writing system and orthographic tendencies as an expression of this conflict within the community of individual actors. And another very important characteristics is that this conflict community is manifest and reciprocal, and we have recognizable. It is recognizable to everyone, especially in the content of newspapers, but also in the literary text in the newspapers. But of course, conflict can be seen as a catalyst for progression. It is not only always negatively connotated. So at the same time, we have this paradoxon of against someone, but also with someone, yeah, and this is a fruitful ground that has positive impacts, for example, on the development of orthographies, or also oh, okay, I think it's the other computer, yeah. So yeah, so, and I will give you briefly an idea of what you can of the manifestations of the conflict from a linguistic but also cultural side. So I defined this kind of levels. The first one, level of performance, the language corpus, and the discourse level. And I will give you briefly some ideas of how this is manifested. So we have here two newspapers. They are both printed in Latin script, and they are directed to a Catholic auditory. On this slide, we have a parallel issue of Nasza Niwa, this very famous biscriptal newspaper, and it is addressed to as well to a Catholic, but also to an Orthodox audience. And here, for example, on the left-hand side, we have a small insight in the discourse level about how the actors were discussing about how the orthographic principles should work. So, and they picked up, for example, the writing traditions in other newspapers and criticized them. So it was very important for them to have their own orthography that differentiates them from the Polish and also from the Russian orthographies. And another example is, I have circled the important fragments here. We see in point 1 the assignment to the Polish or the Ruthenian, not the Russian model, but orthographically it was the Russian model. And later we have a switch to the more neutral term Latin letters. And then we have here the distinction from sorry, I don't see what I'm talking about, from the Polish model in orthography. And the third point, very important, is that we have simultaneously displayed the Julian and the Gregorian calendar. Yeah, and this is not only displayed here, but also in other examples. I'm not going to present on this. Yeah, so we have here an example of cultural religious level where the month names are displayed in two different namings. The one Russified one and the other one that is based on truly Belarusian lexemes. And I also summarized them all on the following slide, so you can see that the months were had different names, and this was also kind of this expression of the conflict community. And this was also very interesting. I'm just going to summarize this in 1 minute. So as you know, we are in Slavic languages, we have palatalization of consonant groups, and you can handle this in two different ways. So, for example, in Polish, where we have diacritics that display this palatalization in the script, and in Russian, we don't have this palatalization marker, which would be, for example, in the Tarashkevitsa, this would be the soft sign. So, and what we see here in the development of the orthography in Belarusian is that the model that was used in the Latin issues where the palatalization was very was displayed and was realized, whereas in the Cyrillic issues the palatalization was not marked via this soft sign in the beginning, and we see we have a phase of convergence, which is approximately in which happens approximately in 1908 and 1909, and then even then we see a rise in palatalization realization in Cyrillic written articles and newspapers from this time on, which is very interesting because we see that there are counter influences between the alphabets and between the writing systems itself. And I will come to a conclusion because we can also see this kind of development in other orthographic principles, for example, in the realization of the akanie and the yakanie. And coming to a conclusion is that this was just an idea for you of how conflicting models that take their beginning in a cultural and a religious conflictuous model can be also reflected in linguistic traits of Belarusian language, and especially in orthography and also in the use of two different scripts. Thank you very much for your attention.
Our next speaker will be joining us online. I'm hoping that Dr. Sviatlana Liasovich is on the screen. Dr. Liasovich was previously worked in the Faculty of Slavic Philology at Polack State University and is currently affiliated with the Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznan.
Hello, dear colleagues.
Yes, she's there. So Dr. Liasovich's paper is called The National Corpus of the Belarusian Language, History and Prospects. Sviatlana, you.
Thank you. Do you have my presentation? Could you please start my presentation?
Can you start it yourself? Can you share your screen, please? Or do we? Can you hear me? Oh, is she frozen?
She's frozen. No, she's blinking.
Can you hear us? I can find her presentation, but
Yeah.
I don't know how we're going to coordinate if she cannot hear us.
Okay.
Can you ask maybe if she can hear us now?
Can you hear me?
Strange.
Yes.
Yeah, I will share her presentation now.
Okay.
Let's see how it goes.
I need to share my okay. Oh,
Yes.
Thank you very much. The creation of a national text corpus is an important task for linguists of any language. Modern linguistic research, the creation of dictionaries and grammars based on the use of representative corpora. Could you please next slide? And the focus of attention shifts from language to speech to discourse, following Pelungan's idea that the emergence of corpora has not just given linguists new powerful tools for analyzing linguistic units. It has, to a certain degree, changed theoretical priorities and partly even views on what language is, or what are the most important tasks of language research. Could you please next slide? A linguistic corpus is a large, machine-readable, unified, structured, annotated, philologically competent set of linguistic data intended to solve specific linguistic problems. Could you please next slide? It should be noted that the main features of the text corpora are machine-readable format, representativeness as a result of a special text selection procedure, and the present of metalinguistic information. Could you please next slide? The concept of a linguistic corpus is directly related to the corpora manager. This specialized search system that includes software tools for searching for queries and providing them to the user in a convenient form, as well as for obtaining statistical information. Could you please next slide? Computer-based research into the Belarusian language began in the late 1970s in the National Academy of Sciences of the BSSR. One of the direction of the research was the creation of concordances of the Belarusian language. In 2001, a corpus of Janka Kupala's works was created at the State University of Grodno under the direction of Lyudmila Rычkova. In particular, the experience of work with corpora was summarized in the monograph Rычkova-Stankevich, Linguistic Corpus of Mass Media of Grodno Region, Technology of Creation, Directions of Use. And it is the first, the last monography connected with linguistic corpora in Belarus. There were several projects in Belarus aimed at creating corpora. In 2005, as part of the state program Electronic Belarus, a parallel Russian-Belarusian corpus of legal text with a volume of about 1 million word usages was created. In 2001, the National Academy of Sciences of Belarus adopted a state program of basic scientific research, one of the tasks of which was the problem of linguistic representative and principles of building a corpus of the Belarusian language. In 2011-2013, a team of researchers from the National Academy of Sciences of Belarus, the Minsk State Linguistic University, and the Russian Academy of Sciences carried out a joint project to create parallel Belarusian, Russian, and Russian-Belarusian corpora containing about 3 million word uses. Could you please next slide? The work on the creation of national corpus itself did not begin until 2015 when a separate project was approved for 2015-2016 creation on the national corpus and lexicogrammatical base on the Belarusian language and its software support, which was implemented at the National Academy of Sciences of Belarus. The result of the project includes the creation of an electronic corpus of 251 million word usages with structural and grammatical annotation, the development of the corpus engine, and the expansion and competition of the lexical and grammatical database, which currently contain about 250,000 words. The corpus consists of several parts. The main corpus, unannotated texts, and biblical corpus. In July 2023, the Belarusian and Corpus 2024 for technical reasons. However, there is a lack of
I think we need to wrap up.
server capacity. At the beginning of 2023, the Corpus contained about 1 billion words. After the resumption of work, only 124 million, or 12% remain. The restored corpus of web resource today includes only the site of an website. This omission of the vast amount of texts from independent media is explained by the script censorship in Belarus today, and not only approaches the Belarusian corpus, but also contradicts the very idea for representative as a main feature of the corpus. Because of the censorship, the focus of the creator of the Belarusian corpus in 2023 shifted to expansion of the corpus with text representing monuments of the history of the language, the dialect subcorpus, parallel legal corpus. Could you please next slide? The problem of representativeness is the most important one for any language corpus, and the peculiarity of creating a Belarusian corpus is that in addition to the problem of linguistic representativeness itself, which is to be solved within the corpus, there is the problem of the functioning of the language as a whole, which affects the effectiveness of the selection of text material for corpus reports. Significant complication of the representativeness problem. In analyzing the problem, representativeness paid to the definition and selection of the criteria for the selection of the most representative texts from various branches of the functioning. As a result of the study, the following were
Sviatlana, if you can hear me, last minute.
gender representation. Yes. Chronicle, historical representativeness, geographical representativeness, representativeness of spelling variants, and we add written and oral text representativeness according to the form of speech. Could you please next slide? And the task of Belarusian corpus linguistic today is to clarify the criteria for the representativeness of the corpus, to determine the electronic base, to determine the initial list of resources to be included in the corpus, to create a team of specialists to consider the possibility of integrating already created resource with new developments to create a subcorpora propose. Could you please next slide?
The last one.
And the creation of a Belarusian text corpora will ensure a modern level of philological research into various aspects of Belarusian language. The corpora will reflect an objective picture of language activity independent of the will of its creator. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Sviatlana. So our final speaker on this panel is Ioana Zamfir. Ioana is a PhD candidate, DPhil candidate in history at the University of Oxford, where she is focusing on queer lived experiences in Belarus, Moldova, and Ukraine, and individuals' abilities to develop and explore their sexual identity amid repression. She holds a BA in History and International Development from McGill University in Canada and an MA from the University of Toronto's Centre for European and Eurasian Studies. Her work examines identity formation under Soviet and post-Soviet regimes, recording emotions, memory, agency, and space. That sounds fascinating. Ioana's paper is called Identity Formation and Post-Soviet Transition in Belarus, Liminal Queer Identities, Resistance, and Power. And the floor is yours.
All right. So this is part of my PhD dissertation. So only a part of it. I'm doing Moldova, Belarus, Moldova, and Ukraine, but today I only present on Belarus. So as was mentioned, my PhD dissertation concerns queer lived experiences and how, despite external hostile circumstances, individuals are still able to make sense of their identity and to find avenues for love and personal fulfillment. And in thinking so, it provides new method to think about late Soviet and post-Soviet periods, notably in terms of emotions and space, and what space can provide in terms of self-understanding of the self. So life for queer people in former Soviet states in the 90s remained characterized by fear, social conformity, and widespread poor mental health. However, it was also defined by the quest for love, affection, intimacy, and friendship. Queer publications that appeared in the 90s, longstanding public cruising spots that dated from the 50s in the Soviet period, and emerging queer spaces like clubs offered queer individuals opportunities for exploration, self-discovery, and acceptance as part of their everyday experiences and personal endeavors. Okay, I'll leave this up. Forgot to put this up, but anyways. Next, you'll see sort of the questions that inform my dissertation. And it's to consider the emotional impact that I said that space can have on people's sense of identity and subjectivity, especially under the Soviet regime that was supposedly predicated upon dictating and regulating all facets of human experience. So I can go back to it after, but so you can have the questions. I explore how themes of privacy, invisibility, informality, liminality, and silence shaped queer love during and after communism. Ultimately, I affirm that non-conforming sexuality is a way of being, an expression of subjectivity, and a form of kinship rooted in choice and survival. I sort of engage with broader queer historiography, and I got to this in the last couple of months, sort of reading through queer history of North America and Western Europe that touch a lot on how queer individuals perceived and understood themselves in the face of stigma and structural repression. While I adopt certain methodologies from queer Western history, like ethnography, I'm trying to move beyond narratives of political rights and the establishment of LGBTQ+ liberation movements, because from what I understood is that the word queer in the history of Western LGBTQ+ liberation is often around the idea of resistance to the status quo. And this is because the movement itself in in North America and Western Europe was rooted in the AIDS crisis and a governmental neglect of that time. However, this is not the same historical reality of Eastern Europe or of the socialist states. So in Western conceptualization, queerness is analyzed through rights, activism, repression, advocacy, and public expression, which is sort of what I'm trying to move beyond. Building on Brubaker's analysis of ethnicity and groupness, I argue that identity categories are situational, shaped by socio-historical context and subject to evolve and fluctuate over time and space. Within Soviet expectations of all public and private ontologies and the simultaneous parallel subculture, same-sex desire should be understood as a story of survival, challenging whether all behavior that's contrary to the regime should be perceived as resistance or as dissidence, or whether it's expressions of humanity and dignity. Drawing on James Scott's concept of public and hidden transcripts, I also explore how individual consciousness and expressions in invisible spaces reflect a unique form of queer struggle that is distinct in intentionality from Western advocacy. Some of the spaces I look at are apartments, be that the familial home, or apartments that queer individual would have gotten once they're adults, public cruising spots, the pleshka, libraries, resorts, beaches, public baths, public restrooms, etc. I think I'll mention one of them after in depth. I argue that rather than discard the term queer, we should view it as a means to complicate our understanding of non-conforming sexual identity, grounding it in respective socio-historical contexts. So I maintain that queerness is above all a way of being, an expression of subjectivity, and again, a kinship that is rooted in individual choice. During the late Soviet and post-Soviet times, liminal spaces served as a threshold for safety and a means of coping for many individuals. By liminal space, I understand sort of the state of in-betweenness, where the public becomes private and the private also is public. This sort of tension that existed in Soviet society. And essentially, while the concept of this liminal space or this in-betweenness is not unique to queer individuals, the way in which these spaces were used and the affect this had on people was distinctive for queer people. Liminality, I find, is a valuable tool to center the private sphere and to uncover how coping, survival, and desire unfolded beyond the public gaze. And so sexuality is understood as an evolving process of self-discovery, shaped by one's exploration of desire rather than a fixed endpoint. All right, This is, I mostly base my research on oral history and on interviews. So you have a bit of the context in which I conducted the interviews last summer. And I'll go a bit more in depth into one of the spaces to give you a bit more of a sense of my research. So sexual identity and sexuality, as you well know, was regulated in public and private spheres in the Soviet regime through legislative and punitive measures, and in the private sphere by social norms and attitudes that permeated from the public. The collapse of the Soviet Union led to economic, political, social, and material upheaval that amplified the visibility of these informal practices in public and formal realms. As I mentioned, queer publications expanded the informal underground spaces created by queer people since the early Soviet times. So essentially, for example, queer people had the opportunity to meet each other because of dating ads that were present in magazines. So that sort of created great opportunity for them to meet that wouldn't have existed in the same way before. Feelings of some sort of liberation or hope facilitated greater exploration of sexual identity and were hinged on greater fluid boundaries between public and private, which had increased in the late Soviet period and notably during Perestroika. All right, so the one I chose for today is the dormitories. So based on the interviews I conducted, there were a couple of spaces that popped up, and this is one of them. So in the communal environment of university dormitories, fantasies arose, loves were entrenched in daily thoughts, first sexual experiences were consummated. These student environments house an amalgamation of queer voices from the various cities and towns in Belarus. Young men from Vitebsk, Homel, Rodna, and Babruisk each found an expression of their sexuality as they arrived in their late teens in the capital. For many, a sense of self was reinforced through their encounters at school and on the street. At a time of coming of age, queer individuals, as anyone else, experience all facets of human experience, the feeling of discovery, change that comes along with moving to a new city to study, Minsk in this case. There's also the fear to act on one's desires and impulses, balancing hope with realistic expectations about social, economic, and political life. Growth characterized these men's times in university. As a fundamentally communal space, the university dormitories were characterized by a cascade of looks, young people trying to find their place in the capital. Many gay men in their early 20s, grappling with loneliness and feeling as though they did not belong, began to understand, conceptualize, and define their identity through the gaze of the other, be it from other queer individuals or from straight individuals. For example, we have Alec, who's, so all the names are changed. So just for the record, so Alec from Corona had in his cohort a poet who participated in literary competitions in Minsk, dressed in drag as Sviatlana or Anna Kedman, depending on the occasions. The poet once remarked to Alec, "You have this," and by this he meant homosexuality, same-sex desire. My respondent did not want to accept it or admit it at first. This lasted for a year until Alec met the poet's courter, whom he fell in love with. Knowing of no other gay men than the three of them, they found solace in understanding each other's company. Initially, fear of negative repercussions shaped their experiences. My respondents were aware of the limitations of life in Belarus, even in the independence period. However, as caution waned, these young men began to accept their non-heteronormative identity and explore personal expressions of sexuality between the three of them in private. Inner parts, hidden for so long, haunting queer people, did though begin to flourish in the Belarusian capital of the 90s. For Alec, Minsk was engulfed by, here I quote, a wave of fresh air and freedom that enabled, here I quote again, access to music and material from abroad. Overnight, everything flew in. Intertwined with long repressed emotions and feelings came the opportunity to connect with oneself and with others in novel ways. Victor from Babruisk understood that relations were not constrained to heterosexuality by coming across magazines such as Speed Info, that was from Russia, or French literature that was then accessible, for example, Emmanuel by Emmanuel Arsan. So music, art, literature, culture played an important role in people's recollections at that time, especially as young adults exploring various facets of their identity at a critical phase, marking a certain break in my understanding with Soviet understandings of the self. Inner conflicts also remained, though, and confusions were no stranger to young adults attempting to navigate social norms while remaining true to themselves. Non-heteronormative thoughts clash with formalized cultural etiquette, which in some instances manifested itself through internalized negative feelings towards same-sex desire. Johan, from a small town close to Vitebsk, conflicted by his Catholic faith and sexual orientation at the time, reflected on moments from his youth when he regrets not fully embracing. In 1991-1992, he went daily to Lenin Square in Minsk, where parliamentary sessions were held, and politicians spoke to the crowds about the day's proceedings. One day, a 30-year-old man from Hrodna approached him, asking to meet again when he would be next in Minsk. Johan replied that if the man approached him again, he would inform his father and report him. He notes, somehow I intuitively perceived it as a threat, as something inappropriate. It's a shame looking back now, because it was an opportunity to know and discover myself early on. The other respondent, Iheb from Vitebsk, recalls a markedly different experience in university, illuminating the impact of privilege and the development of sexual identity that could only be possible in the 90s. He had a chance to attend the University of Humanities, supported by the Embassy of France. He largely recollects a certain freedom in young adulthood that was shaped by the experiences provided by foreign investment and professors from abroad that allowed him to express his sexuality publicly without any repercussions. He enjoyed living his identity openly in the educational, professional, and personal realms. Right, I'm coming to my conclusion now. So, from the accounts that I've gathered, the 90s did mark a certain period of opening. And I seek to highlight through these experiences that queer lives didn't have a single narrative. Each individual perceptions of their own sexual identity was shaped by the external realities, reaction, interaction with the space in which they found themselves in, reinforcing the multidirectionality of memory that needs to be accounted both in Soviet and queer history. All right, now, and essentially expressions of queer selfhood in the late Soviet and post-Soviet society are not always politically driven or driven by opposition to a hostile environment. Instead, queer love was often centered on self-discovery, accommodation, and survival, offering a new framework to the concept of queer through an analysis of the history of non-conforming individuals in Eastern Europe. And yeah, I think I'll finish it there. Thank you.
Okay. So can I just have a quick show of hands how many questions we have? So we do have a couple. Okay, so how much do we have? We have 10 minutes. I asked my colleague Ioana Zakevich from the University of Warwick has offered to give a brief feedback as discussed. And the only reason I didn't introduce him at the beginning is that I couldn't see him and I thought he wasn't here.
Finding my way to the room.
But so if you could just keep it to sort of 2 or 3 minutes, and then we've got several questions.
Yeah, no, like very interesting three discussions. Thanks a lot for that. I think it's kind of for me since Sviatlana we're more kind of on a similar topic of Ioana's, and I'm afraid I will not have too many comments because I was fascinated by listening to what you've researched. You have like more distinct ones. So perhaps more generally to what Maria and Sviatlana have been saying, I think it's fascinating to see how the Belarusian language has always found itself and still find itself in sort of in between space, which kind of transcends obviously to where you researched the identity in the 90s. But it's basically I was kept thinking that how the corpuses that well exist in the parallel words, how the Latin, the Cyrillic, they always been also done in parallel, and also in between the language systems like Polish, Russian. Belarusian language is still one of the very few in the world that has two Wikipedia versions, for instance. So it's still not there. Like it still keep struggling to have a proper systematic way of doing the language. So yeah, and despite that, mostly about the linguistic research, and I suppose as well, social sciences. So I was also kept thinking in that direction as well. And what struck me also in Sviatlana's presentation, how the simple and well, quite accurate diagram, the language makes a discourse. It struck me that it's also probably the other way around, right? So the discourse also makes the language. It's the selection of corpus of words, selection of how the language should be. It's not just based on how people speak, but it's also trying to use the discourse to actually make sure that people speak in the way and think in the way that's most comfortable with the discourse that's controlled by the system. Well, yeah, and for Ioana's research, it's also, I think, struck me as, especially on the very last slide you showed about the increased subjectivity, right? it's perhaps a very good illustration of the time, more generally of the 90s, so the post-Soviet breakout, that in the time of perceivably increased subjectivity, there was also an increased understanding of any specific identity and any specific feeling that you have to be more subjective to that. So now as the subjectivity as such is being suppressed quite a lot, you definitely see people being less willing to openly speak about their identities, less willing to persuade them actively and to protect them. Not necessarily just because there are no ways of doing that, but obviously just because the entire self-perception of that being possible at all, regardless of the actual state of affairs, perhaps seems less probable. And then the 90s, obviously, and the queer community of the 90s seems like a very great representation of how people themselves seek less subjectivity if they perceive it as that, not necessarily as it's restricted directly and it has direct consequences, which perhaps opens the areas of discussion in terms of how the hyper-realities work and how the mind control worked, how they actually work, as opposed to direct repressions, how exactly the control of discourse, control of the how people see the world around themselves, controls the people indirectly in some way. But yeah, just to keep it as brief as I can so that people can ask questions, obviously.
Okay, so if you have some comments on that, we'll take some questions first and you can respond as well. So I know that Katarzyna had a question. And yeah. So I think we have 10 minutes, do we? Yeah.
I pick up a few questions.
Yeah, so we take Katarzyna and Alan's question.
My name is Katarzyna Mackiewicz, Francis Skaryna Library. I have questions to Katarzyna and to Sviatlana. Thank you very much, all the speakers for your wonderful papers. I have a question to Katarzyna regarding the concept of conflict community in relation to allography. This is, to me, this is a new concept because your slides show the exhibits from our new museum. We are dealing with the phenomenon of allography. It was just wonderful to have that illustration. But in our interpretation of those printed artifacts, we do not necessarily see conflict. We see mutual penetration of cultures. In the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, where, for instance, Tatar Kitab writings in Arabica, that wasn't so much an expression of conflict, but that kind of osmosis, merging of different cultures coexisting peacefully together. So just would you comment on that? And my question to Sviatlana, I'm afraid the signal was lost at the most interesting point when we were saying something about the loss of the large part of the Corpus. I think you mentioned 12% is preserved. Just this sounds like a catastrophe. Could you please clarify whether any of those materials are recoverable and what is being planned to, if not, what is being done to recover them? Thank you.
Okay, and Alan, please ask your question as a question without preamble or elaboration.
A question for Maria, and it's just based on one word that fascinated me in your slide with all the newspaper headlines. They were all understandable, except the rather unusual Belarus, or was it Belarus? Because there was the Polish letter in there. Could you perhaps explain what that was meant to be and how we should pronounce it, or what that was? It could have perhaps been purely artistic, of course, because it kind of looked good in the middle there. The other one is for Sviatlana. And apologies, the mathematical physicist in me was baffled by some of the numbers. And this really is a question intended to maybe assist you to clarify some numbers you gave us about numbers of words. We were all, I'm sure, startled by this reduction, this loss from what you wrote on the slide as 1 billion. That's 1,000 million words, reduced to 125 million. Are you really sure it's millions? It almost looks like there's a factor of 1,000. The normal, I mean, I'm no linguist, but you know, it's about 150,000 English language words, aren't there? And even Russian is credited with about 200,000. Maybe there was just a slight numerical issue there.
We'll
clarify.
We'll get an answer to that.
Thank you.
Just hurrying because we're close to time. We also have a question from Ihar Ivanov.
Okay, I've got a question to Ioana. I'm thinking about identities, queer identity, national identity, maybe any other kind of overarching identities. Have you come across the cases when maybe queer identity was perceived as a problem or was a problem, stopped people from kind of engaging into something bigger? I mean something bigger, something else on top of being a queer person and trying to survive. Just fascinating. I never thought about it actually. So thank you very much for pointing it out. But anything else?
Okay, shall we start with Sviatlana online? Do you want to unmute yourself? I can't see you. So the question about loss of that.
Why does Sviatlana can hear us?
Can you hear us, Sviatlana?
Is she here?
Is she still there? Okay, your question might go unanswered because I can't see her. Okay, in that case,
Okay. Katarzyna, thank you very much for your question. I was awaiting this question because maybe I could make it clear in my presentation. Of course, the Latin alphabet is something that came through cultural and it was implemented into Belarusian language through cultural contact. But maybe I missed it in my presentation. I didn't utter it very clearly. I have in mind the situation in the 19th century when Belarusian and Ukrainian languages were strongly oppressed by Russian. Yeah, so this is when the conflict I'm looking at begins. So of course, just barely having these newspapers in two different scripts is not a clear kind of conflict. But if you see it from this perspective, that this Latin script, for example, was chosen by some actors from the 19th century deliberately, like from Dunin Marcinkiewicz and also from Kastus Kalinowski. So you can clearly define it as a conflict community already. I'm very happy to see your museum tomorrow. I'm very excited about it. And coming now to your question, yeah, this is L in Belarusian. It's not Polish W, but of course it's borrowed from Polish alphabet, and it still exists in the Belarusian Latin version of Nasza Niwa, of today's Nasza Niwa, because they started broadcasting Nasza Niwa beginning in 2023, exactly at the International Mother Day language, which is the 21st of February. Yeah, and this is also yeah, a sign for or the characteristic that this conflict perpetuates, because even sometimes when the conflict is not visible, yeah, because it wasn't visible for a couple of decades, but now with this Russian war against Ukraine, the Belarusians started again using Belarusian Latinica more frequently. Yeah, and that's another topic I'm very interested in. And if you have any further questions, I'm very happy to answer you of your questions at the reception then.
Nice, thank you, Eva. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to say, and I think I can connect it to what you were saying as well in terms of how discourse shapes the way identity is, how you conceptualize of your identity, because I think part of the question is how much did queer individuals actually describe themselves as such in the 90s? So then there was that part that was hard to formulate, and then you connect it to other types of identity. Then, of course, it became harder to reconcile. But other ones that appear was, of course, Belarusian identity, and then that sort of, well, it was interesting because some respondents sort of channeled unfulfilled sexual desire through activism, or by engaging in great opportunities for Belarusian identity in the late 80s and then in the 90s. So that there was that part that, for example, that could take over inability to explore their own same-sex desire. There was that in terms of, channeling elsewhere also in terms of education. There were a lot that sort of put their energy as they were growing up into school, because there was no opportunity again to make sense of what they were feeling, who they were. So that took over as well. If not, there was religious identity that I was surprised that popped up in a lot of the interviews. And it was maybe 5 of them, all Catholic, which I found interesting, and only one had abandoned their faith. So then that was also a conflicting identity that sort of arose in that time. And all of them made sense of it when they left Belarus. So that's also interesting in terms of movement geography. What did Belarus not permit in that regard that moving abroad did? I don't have an answer yet, but that is something I'm thinking about. So that's sort of some of the tensions in terms of different types of identity that I've noted.
So I think everyone will join me in thanking our panel. There's some very interesting work going on here. So
yeah. Well, thank you very much, Paul, for moderating this panel. Now we have our keynote address, and we'll have a reception which will follow. So maybe let's just have 2 minutes, and then we'll reconvene.